As you all know, new core Unitarian Universalist values were recently adopted as a way of putting love at the center of our faith. Since that happened, I've spent some time thinking about what that means in practice. And it seems to me that to put love at the center of such an inclusive faith like ours, we need to practice unconditional love. We're all familiar with that term, unconditional love, right? It means affection, caring, and acceptance without limits. Just about everyone has heard that term before, but here's a related term, and you may not have heard this one: unconditional acceptance. I think that's a quite radical, powerful concept because it implies inclusivity at the most foundational level. Unconditional acceptance implies that anyone, everyone, can be part of the group, that anyone, everyone can belong. It implies that anyone, everyone will be cared for. It implies that anyone, everyone will be loved unconditionally. Here's one way of expressing this idea: many different beliefs, one loving community. And here's another, and this may be stronger, clearer way of saying it: be yourself here. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's the motto of this congregation. This is what the famous Unitarian Universalist minister, Reverend Dr. Thandeka, says about this kind of idea. And I quote her: Unitarian Universalists nurture the redemptive capacity of all human hearts to be transformed. This means that we are proactive, creating human communities that nurture the capacity of all human beings to bond in ways that are productive for their own well-being and for that of the wider world. And so we affirm human nature in positive terms, rather than condemning it as irretrievably broken and fallen from grace. That's quite a mouthful. This sounds to me like she is endorsing the idea of unconditional acceptance, that whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever you think, whatever you believe, you can simply be yourself here. Lest we get confused, unconditional love and acceptance doesn't mean condoning or ignoring bad behavior. It separates the action from the person. We respect everyone's humanity while holding them accountable and establishing boundaries. The basis of her affirmation of human nature is, as she says, that you use affirm human nature in positive terms. But I was surprised to learn that in the study of the human mind, the field of psychology, the idea of affirming human nature in positive terms is remarkably new. For more than a century, psychologists had a very different worldview. It was based on the approach of Arthur Schopenhauer, a German theorist from the 1700s and 1800s. He asserted that life is completely comprised of striving and pain. He famously stated that the safest way of not being very miserable is not to expect to be very happy. Freud famously argued that achieving enduring happiness is practically impossible due to our biological constitution and exterior threats. His philosophy was, he thought, a realistic acceptance of life with his goal of being to transform crippling neurotic misery into common unhappiness. Whoa, what a low bar, huh? It wasn't until 1998 when Dr. Martin Seligman came along and developed a movement called positive psychology that this viewpoint was challenged. Dr. Seligman is credited for refocusing the field of psychology from solely treating mental illness to actively supporting people's potential through the scientific study of human flourishing, well-being, and happiness. He gave a framework he used for this approach, the acronym PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. That is positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning or mattering, and accomplishment. So let's start with positive emotion. It turns out that about half of our level of positive emotion, whatever level you or I may have, is inherited. Unfortunately, we can't pick our parents, so there's not much we can do about that half. However, the good news is that we can do something about the other half. So what kinds of things can we do? Well, for one thing, we can practice gratitude. It's not hard, though it does take some discipline at the beginning. One way to practice is to write 3 things that you're grateful for at the end of the day and why. Pretty simple, doesn't cost a thing. People find that if they do it for a while, they start looking for things during the day to include in their journal that evening. That kind of paying attention is a form of mindfulness, a way of savoring the good things in your life. It can begin to create a positive mindset. It has for me. I've been writing a few lines in my journal each night for about 7 years. And it may sound silly, but when something in my day brings me joy, I note it with a little smiley face. And I like to look back a year or two sometimes to see the good things that I've had in my life. Another way to be positive is by practicing forgiveness. I find that letting go of old resentments unburdens me. It's helped me move around in the world with more ease and freedom. And that leads me to joy in the present and the fostering of hope and optimism for the future. The next step in the PERMA model is engagement. It has to do with being in the flow, finding and using your core strengths, even in aspects of your daily or weekly life that you don't particularly enjoy. Identifying what you're good at, what you enjoy, and consciously building that into your day. If possible, even transforming an unpleasant part of your life into something fun. Here's one example. A young woman was paying her way through school, working as a grocery store bagger, a job she did not particularly like. She found her strength was emotional intelligence. She decided to deeply engage with each of her customers as much as she could, trying to make each interaction the high point of their day. As you can imagine, it dramatically increased her enjoyment of her job. The R in PERMA stands for relationships and social connection. Seligman says, whatever you enjoy doing, find someone else to do it with. Thandeka tells a story that shows how important social connections can be. She says that part of her ministry is helping congregations start and sustain small group ministries of 6 to 12 people who meet regularly as a spiritually empowering practice. She describes taking part in these small groups as being love beyond belief, because they often lead participants to a personal experience of a change of heart. This is what she means by a change of heart. After a workshop, when she asked the congregation at a New England UU church if they would like to gather in small groups, one of the most respected elders stood up and slowly walked to the front. He faced the congregation and said that he'd wanted something like this for years. Why? Because he was lonely. I do not have any friends, he confessed. People were shocked. He was a revered, respected member of the congregation, a pillar of the church. How could he be lonely? They asked each other. When people quieted down, the man said, "Every man in this room who is my age knows what I'm talking about. We've been taught not to talk about our feelings. We're not supposed to be emotionally vulnerable or close to anyone except our wives." Reverend Thandeka says, "I felt the man's vulnerability because his heart spoke the hidden language of my own heart, loneliness. I too had learned to be emotionally invulnerable and closed off. But here in this gathering, community, someone so much like myself had stepped forward and said, 'I'm lonely.' His story was my story. My story was his story." Thandeka said that everyone there knew they were in the presence of an opened heart, a change of heart. They had heard a calling for healing, one that could only be performed by a religious community, because salvation is not a solo act. She says that at that moment, everyone in the room felt a love for that man, a love beyond belief, beyond their prior ideas of who he was. Together, they had created a caring and compassionate space within which they could, all of them could, simply love him. Which brings us to the M in PERMA, and that stands for meaning or mattering. Dr. Seligman says that he is talking here about belonging to and serving something larger than ourselves. So he might say that one way to measure the meaning of your life, how much you matter in the world, is to write a life review from the point of view of a younger member of your family. What will they say about what you meant to them and how your life impacted the world? Another way could be to write it from the viewpoint of a group you're involved with. Take, for example, this congregation. Because one thing I can say without hesitation is that if you are here today, or if you're taking part through Zoom, you are valued and important to this community. Every single one of you is important. Every single one of you makes a difference here. Another way is to go out of your way to help others. Do you know that the one thing that a grieving person can do to lift their own spirits is to help someone else? Maybe someone whose grief is more recent than yours. And if you are in grief today, and I know some are, then you can lean on this congregation. We add meaning to our lives by applying our strengths to causes and groups outside of ourselves. Anything from community volunteering to mentoring and activism, but we can also do so by taking part in religious and spiritual practices. Prayer, meditation, gratitude, connecting with nature and creativity are all really good choices. And of course, by caring for those we love. You know, research shows that Unitarian Universalists aren't the most optimistic people in the world. And yet it's like social justice work is in our DNA as you use. And you really can't be involved in this work without believing that the world can be a better place. So maybe the research is wrong, And maybe we just don't like telling researchers how optimistic we actually are. But either way, think about how much more oomph we could put into it, how much more meaning we could find in the attempt if we felt in our hearts that we really could succeed. Dr. Seligman's final point is about achievement. He says this is something we pursue for its own sake, whether it's at work, in sports, or elsewhere in life. It could be anything from learning a language to playing a game or doing a hobby. A friend of mine feels a sense of accomplishment when she finishes a picture puzzle and puts in that last piece, or bests her last score in a computer game. Personally, I feel a great sense of accomplishment in my yoga class when I can hold a plank or keep my balance while practicing one-leg mountain. Again, these are all part of increasing our well-being, of becoming a genuinely flourishing individual. It's been said that UUs don't actually put love at the center, that our intellects insist on taking up that space. After all, our spiritual ancestors began this faith by centering arguments about the Trinity versus the unity of God, about the predestination of souls, and about whether Jesus was human or divine. All interesting questions, no doubt. But the Reverend Thandeka says that religious belief and belonging originate from human emotion, not intellectual doctrine. She says our nervous systems and our feelings are the access points of spiritual awareness, and not, as the old Unitarian joke says, that we are only alive from the neck up. She reminds us that while Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," when he was at a party and the host asked if he would like another drink, he said, "I think not," and disappeared. We don't want to do that. The point is, in a way, Dr. Seligman and Thandeka, and also our new core UU values, with love at the center, are all saying the same thing, that we need to transform ourselves and put the process of transforming our congregations into living, breathing organisms that foster deep emotional connection and help us experience a deep sense of belonging, what I'm calling unconditional acceptance, what Reverend Thandeka describes as love beyond belief. Love for ourselves and each other, for every single one of us, and anyone, everyone who comes into this sanctuary, whether only once or for the rest of their lives. Not only can, but will lead to human flourishing for us as individuals and for this congregation and even the greater community that we serve. That sense of acceptance, of well-being, of love opens and frees us. It makes each of us more available to life's possibilities and to the others around us. And it turns love beyond belief into reality. So may it be.